Hello, today we are focusing on Standard 2-3. We are developing a model to describe the cycling of matter among living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. And we're focusing on learning target 15, which says I can label the carbon cycle correctly using the following words: combustion, respiration, photosynthesis, consumption, decomposition, and respiration. So we're going to be focusing on the carbon cycle. Alright, so as a review from last time, remember that all living things need energy and matter to survive. And matter are all living atoms and molecules that makes all living things. And also remember that we talked about how matter doesn't get used up like energy, it actually gets recycled. And so remember I explained this diagram showing recycling matter, and this is a list of really important matter or types of atoms to living things. So let's talk about another type of matter that is really very important to living things. So last time we talked about water, today we're going to talk about carbon. So what is carbon? Carbon is an element on Earth that is important for all life, and all living things are made out of carbon atoms. So these are pictures of different ways carbon can be stuck to each other. So each small dot represents one carbon atom. If you rearrange carbon atoms in this way, it makes diamond. If you rearrange them in this way, it makes graphite, which is pencil lead. And this is another way of arranging carbon atoms, which are nanotubes. And this is really new technology that is used in a lot of electronic devices like cell phones. But nevertheless, we need carbon to survive. We find carbon in a lot of our food. So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats and lipids are all made out of carbon atoms. And I just wanted to show you this nutrition label because in the nutrition label you will find these things. These are nutrients that you will see. Now, living things can't make their own carbon, so they need to get it from their environments or their ecosystems. We find carbon in the air, such as in the form of carbon dioxide. We find it in rocks, and we also find it in the ocean. And so, like water, carbon is being recycled, and it's constantly moving through different parts of ecosystems. The key word here is recycled. It's never created or destroyed. It's recycled and shuffled among living things. And one of the great examples of a way we recycle carbon is our relationship with producers. Remember that we breathe out carbon dioxide and they breathe in carbon dioxide, and that's one way that producers are able to obtain their carbon. And we get carbon back when we eat these producers and digest them in our bodies. So the carbon cycle is a cycle that represents how carbon moves through different parts of an ecosystem. Here's a picture of the carbon cycle. You're going to need to know the different ways that carbon is being recycled to different living things, such as how you see it here. So, how does carbon move from the atmosphere into living things? Let's take a look. So I mentioned producers earlier. So remember, producers will get carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they will produce sugar or glucose. And this is a picture of glucose. If you were to use a very powerful microscope, electron microscope, you would be able to see the structure of glucose. And you can see glucose is a type of sugar that has carbon in it. The C, the black C, represents carbon. O is oxygen, H is hydrogen. When you rearrange atoms like this, it makes glucose. So glucose has carbon. When we eat plants and eat glucose, we are putting carbon back into our bodies. Herbivores will eat plants for energy and get glucose into their bodies. And when glucose is entering a living thing's body, the digestive system will actually break down that glucose into different atoms, and the body will actually create new nutrients such as proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. One of the reasons why we have different types of tissue in our body, so for example, we have different cells like fat cells, liver cells, muscle cells, different types of cells, is because our body has amazing ability to take apart atoms that we eat, such as glucose, and put them back together in a new way to form new molecules, such as muscle cells. And when the carnivores will eat that meat, they receive that carbon that originally came from the plants into their body. So let's talk about how does carbon move back from living organisms back into the environment. So all living things, including plants, use a process called cellular respiration to turn food into energy. You should have learned about this last year in sixth grade. But as a review, remember cellular respiration is a process that occurs in all cells. And basically, it's the way that we take food and oxygen and make energy. Remember that we can't just eat food and get energy just from eating. Our cells actually need to use that food to generate energy. And the way we do that is through cellular respiration, which uses an organelle called the mitochondria in the cell. When we do cellular respiration, we get energy, but we release carbon dioxide as a waste product, and we breathe it out into the atmosphere for the plants. Another way that carbon gets returned to the environment is through our decomposers. Decomposers, remember, they feed on dead things and waste products, and when they do that while they are breaking down their nutrients and consuming them, one of the things that they release is carbon dioxide and carbon back into the soil. Let's talk about fossil fuels. So you have learned about fossil fuels. You may be familiar with the idea of fossils being a type of energy for human beings, and this graphic represents that very well. We have a line of cars getting gas, and gas is a type of fossil fuel. So remember that fossil fuels form because there's a certain number of dead organisms that get compressed in the ground, and they don't decompose, they just get buried. And with lots of pressure over millions of years, those dead things formed a fossil fuel. And those fossil fuels are made out of carbon because remember, our bodies are made out of carbon. And when you add pressure and time to dead bodies, they will form a new type of molecule and fossil fuels. All these things like coal, oil, and natural gas, they are all fossil fuels, and currently we have been burning them or using them for energy. So let's talk about how humans have disrupted or messed up the natural carbon cycle. Remember, the carbon cycle occurs without us doing anything. Okay, this process right here that I showed you in the beginning, right here, this happens naturally. Okay, it's just part of the cycle of life. Now, when we have introduced different forces of energy, so for example, when we burn coal or natural gas, and we release a lot of this kind of pollution into the atmosphere, we actually messed up the natural cycle that was already there. So basically what we're doing is when we burn the fossil fuels, we are putting extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That carbon isn't supposed to be there, basically. We dug up things from millions of years ago from the ground, and we are burning them and adding them back into the atmosphere. So because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and you guys did a great PBL on that last year, basically what that means is that gas will trap the sun's energy in the earth. It kind of forms like a blanket. We call it a blanket because you all know that when you wear a blanket, it kind of traps the heat inside and makes you warm. So carbon dioxide is like a blanket. It's a greenhouse gas, and it's starting to heat up the earth, and we call this global warming. And because of global warming, a lot of ecosystems have changed. So ocean temperatures have gone up. Certain plants, they have had to deal with differences in temperature and differences in carbon dioxide. Another interesting fact is decomposers that we talked about here. They actually decompose faster when it's warm, and so they're also releasing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and adding to the greenhouse effect. So those are all factors that we should consider and think about when we are using fossil fuels, um, how we are impacting the natural world. Okay, so at this time you are going to log into BlendSpace for the LT15 Level 2 quiz. Remember that a score of passing is 4 out of 5. If you get a 4 out of 5 or higher, you're going to mark an X in Level 2. If you didn't pass, you are going to give yourself a Level 1 and work on the retake. And that's it.